Chapter 10. Chapter 10. Email from Commander Dexter, April 28, 2091, to U.S. Terrestrial Command. SITREP. I'm in receipt of your comm regarding the updated time of arrival for the resupply ship. We will be standing by. Cy Dexter, Commander, Expeditionary and Settlement Team, U.S. Territory, Mars. Chapter 10. Algae Days. I stared at the goopy green sludge. It wasn't very appetizing. Algae porridge again? Vera complained. Albie just shoved the food into his mouth. It's not that bad, he said. Speak for yourself, Trey said. His teeth were green from the porridge. We'd been eating the same meals for the last few days. Algae porridge for breakfast, algae stew for lunch, and algae loaf for dinner. We were all pretty sick of it, especially the algae loaf. I can't wait until the ship gets here, Flossie said, staring at her bowl. The weeks before the supply ship arrived were always hard. By now, we'd run out of all the good provisions. Chocolate, sugar, freeze-dried fruit, salt, cinnamon, maple syrup. Just about everything that made life worth living. It's not that we would ever starve. We had 2 storage rooms full of MREs, meals ready to eat, that we could live on for years. But they weren't very tasty. And of course, we had algae in the vegetables that Phineas grew. I miss chocolate, Vera said. Me too, Albie said. And honey. I miss bread made with earth flour, Flossie said. Jam, Trey said. That strawberry kind. What about those little oranges, I said. Those are my favorites. Mandarin oranges, Flossie said. Across the room, Cy stood up to make an announcement. No regular chores this morning, he said. It's harvest. All of us kids groaned. A few times a year, Phineas grew a big batch of algae, and when it was ready to be harvested, everyone had to drop what they were doing to help out. No one liked it, but there was no getting out of the work because we were making something absolutely vital to the survival of the settlement. Toilet paper. With 11 people, we went through a lot of this stuff. Also, we would make a version of kitty litter for Leo. Albie tried to rally us. Come on, let's go. The sooner we start, the sooner we're done, he said. I hate my life, Vera muttered. Even Flossie seemed to wilt a little. That wasn't the COVID, by the way. Processing the algae into toilet paper was no fun. You had to pour the algae through a machine that stripped out the water, and then you spread the algae paste thinly onto plastic sheets to dry. After that, you had to cut it up into small squares. It was hot, messy, miserable all-day affair, and if it wasn't done correctly, you ended up with scratchy, bumpy toilet paper. As I stood up to follow, Cy called, Belle, you'll be helping Salty Bill in the kitchen. How come Belle gets out of harvest? Trey asked, a mutinous expression on his face. Because his collarbone still isn't strong enough, thanks to your little outing, Cy replied. I can help. I feel fine, I insisted. Absolutely not, said Memes in a firm voice. Trey didn't even look at me. He stomped out. Salty Bill had modeled the kitchen after the one on a submarine that he'd worked on for years. It was long and narrow with a walk-in storage closet at one end. Every bit of space was used as efficiently as possible. It was Salty Bill's kingdom, and we were only allowed to use it with his permission. He was very particular. Something put away in the wrong place resulted in a lot of yelling. In spite of this, it was usually fun to help in the kitchen. I liked the stirring and the mixing and the measuring, and I loved the scents. The sweet spiciness of cinnamon, the cake batter smell of vanilla, the doughy smell of fresh-baked bread. But today, Salty Bill was crankier than usual, and that was saying something. Every time he opened the storage closet door, he slammed it shut again, muttering about having nothing to cook with. No flour, he said, no garlic powder, no baking soda. While eating was hard on us, making meals was hard on Salty Bill. There'd better be salt on that supply ship, he grumbled. Once, during the early years, Earth Command had forgotten to pack salt on the supply ship, and Salty Bill had hit the roof. That's how he got his nickname. Can we make something different than algae loaf for supper tonight? I asked him. Salty Bill stared at the empty shelves. Well, I guess we can try to make pasta. Get some algae. I grabbed a few dried algae blocks. They always smelled a little funny. Meme said they reminded her of swimming in the lake when she was a child. I still couldn't quite picture a lake. I'd never seen that much water in my life. We broke the blocks into chunks and put them into the blending machine, adding water. Then we rolled out the algae dough, sliced it into long threads, and put it in boiling water. What to do for sauce? Salty Bill asked, wiping his hands on his apron. I don't think Phineas has any tomatoes, I told him. Salty Bill sighed. Oh, I miss the days when I could take the train to another settlement and get a cup of sugar. Really? I asked. He pursed his lips. Well, that didn't happen often, but it was nice knowing that we had the option. And then he did the strangest thing. He laughed. One time I was trying to make bread and I didn't have any yeast, so I went to the French settlement and I asked to borrow some. And do you know what they did? I shook my head. They gave me some and a basket of baguettes. What's a baguette? It's a really long loaf of bread, he said, holding his arms out wide. Just about the most delicious thing that I have ever tasted. He seemed to catch himself. Well, those days are long gone. I thought about other things that were gone. What was Lissa like? I asked. Salty Bill looked at me sharply. Why do you want to know? Because I don't remember her, I said. I was too little. He stroked his beard. Well, she was always happy, and she loved waffles. I love waffles, I said. It was terrible when she died, he said, shaking his head. Cy took it the hardest. The timer went off on the cooker. Salty Bill poured the algae pasta into a strainer and then put some in a bowl for us to try. We both took a bite. Well, he asked, what do you think? I forced myself to swallow. It was terrible. That bad? He asked. I nodded. He picked up the bowl of pasta and tipped it into the trash. Looks like I'm making algae loaf, he said. Again. That night after supper, we kids gathered in the recreation room to watch an Earth Digireel. We had amassed a large collection of detective stories, dramas, romances, mysteries, horror, cooking shows. Right now we were watching a courtroom drama. It was a really old one from the 1980s. It featured people who were called attorneys. And instead of fighting with a sword or a gun, attorneys used words. And they won fights by persuading people. I was fascinated by this. Look, she's wearing a pantsuit, Flossie said excitedly, pointing to the attorney on the screen. Flossie was sitting in her usual spot on the couch, and next to her was Albie. I was sitting on the floor petting Pup, a small robot who made happy dog-like sounds whenever you petted him. Cy said he was the best dog ever because he could walk himself. What's wrong with her shoulders? Albie asked. The shoulders of the attorney's jacket were all puffed up. Oh, they're supposed to look that way. The 1980s were so fashionable, Flossie said with a swoony look. Oh, I just love the olden days. I would never wear anything like that, Vera said from where she was lying on the floor with her head on a cushion. Well, what if it was black? Flossie asked her. No way. I would still have those weird pillow shoulders, Vera said. I agreed with Vera that the pillow shoulders were weird, and they looked uncomfortable. But stranger to me was that almost all of the people had very pale skin. Here on Mars, our skin colors were varied, from darker than me, Darby, to lighter than me, Vera, to just about like me, Cy. Oh, look at her hair, Flossie said, pointing at the screen. There was a lady with long red hair. Does she put paint on her hair to make it red? I asked. Flossie shook her head. No, that's her actual hair, silly. I had never seen a person with red hair in my life, in real life. You mean it grew that way? I asked. Yes, she said. There are people on Earth who have red hair. I've seen digipics. You can't believe everything you see, Flossie, Vera scoffed. It's probably fake, like the window behind the curtains. She was referring to the long cream-colored drapes that memes had hung years ago. When we were little, she told us not to pull on them because there was a fragile window behind them. Now, of course, Vero didn't listen and opened the curtains to reveal nothing. There was no window. Memes had just hung the curtains to make the room feel more Earth-like. The adults hadn't grown up underground like us, so they were funny about it sometimes. The scene transitioned and the attorney was in a place that I knew was called a restaurant. It was like our mess hall, only bigger and fancy. There was a sheet on the table and a flower, and I knew what a flower was, but I'd never seen one of those in real life either. And on the table, there was a slice of pie with some kind of golden crust. "What is that food they're eating?" Albie asked, leaning forward. Oh, I know. That's a quiche," Flossie said. "Oh my God, that looks delicious," Vera said. "What's it made out of?" Flossie screwed up her eyes as if trying to remember. "Cheese, spinach, and a lot of eggs." "What are eggs?" Trey asked, looking up from the game he was playing on his digislate. It was his favorite. You had to shoot asteroids before they hit you. I knew the answer to that one. "They come from a chicken bird," I said. "I would love to go to a restaurant place," Flossie said, a little wistful. "I'd like to go anywhere but here," Vera said. "Really? Looked what happened last time you left the settlement," Albie said pointedly. Vera frowned at him. "You sound more like Cy every day." "What's that supposed to mean?" Albie asked. "You sound kind of like him," Flossie agreed. "Yup," Trey said. Albie looked at me. What could I say? "That's true," I said. "The point is," Vera said, "I don't want to spend my entire life here." "Why not?" I asked. I didn't understand her. "I don't want to spend my life making toilet paper. I want to eat something besides algae loaf. I want to meet other people," Vera said. "Remember how they chased us at the French settlement?" I asked her. But Vera was now getting worked up, and there was no reasoning with her when she was like this. "Who are we going to fall in love with?" Vera demanded. "Love?" Albie asked. "Yes," she said. "Don't you want to fall in love?" I never really thought about it," Albie admitted, taking off his hat and scratching his head. "Well, I want to fall in love," Vera exclaimed. "Not me," Trey said. "Yeah, me neither," I said. "I want to fall in love wearing a pantsuit, or maybe a poodle skirt like from the 1950s, Flossie said. "What do you think, pantsuit or poodle skirt?" We all just looked at her.